If you're like me, you want to really get the important stuff,
Yeah.
without drowning in details.
Right. The key takeaway is the connections.
Exactly. And today we're doing a deep dive into something fundamental,
Mhm.
labor and the movements that shaped it.
Yeah, it's a huge topic. So to help us navigate, we've got three main sources lined up.
Okay, what are we working with?
We have an article that outlines some major U.S. labor strikes, a piece reflecting on, well, the meaning of Labor Day today, and then a broader overview from Wikipedia on labor rights and the movement itself.
Got it. So the mission here is to sort of cut through, find the core insights about labor history, worker rights, collective action.
And how it all still matters, yeah. We're looking for those connections, maybe some surprising facts along the way, see how the past shapes, well, right now.
Okay, makes sense. So this whole story of labor action, where does it kick off?
Well, it's interesting because striking for better conditions, it's not new. Not at all.
Oh, really?
Yeah, even back in colonial America, you had groups, fishermen, bakers, guys collecting refuse, basically banding together, going on strike for fairer pay, better treatment.
Huh. So the idea of collective action goes way back.
Deep roots. It really shows that fundamental idea of workers needing a voice.
Yeah.
It's been around.
What strikes me, though, reading this is the risk. I mean, it wasn't just asking nicely, was it?
No, not even close. The sources really highlight this.
Right.
What's called a violent labor history in the U.S.
Violent. Like physically.
Absolutely. Through the 1800s, early 1900s, if you were picketing, organizing, you faced real threats. Violence from police, sure, but also hired guns, private security.
Wow. That takes some serious courage then.
It really does. And think beyond the physical danger, too, the personal sacrifice.
Like losing pay.
Exactly. Going on strike meant, instant financial hardship. How do you pay rent? Buy food. Plus the risk of getting fired, blacklisted.
Making it impossible to find another job.
Pretty much. So these weren't like casual decisions. It shows real commitment.
Let's get into some of those big moments then. The article mentions several key strikes. Homestead Steel Strike, 1892. What was that about?
Okay, Homestead. Yeah, that was intense. Pennsylvania, basically the Steelworkers Union versus Carnegie Steel. And Henry Clay Frick was running things for the company.
Frick, right. Heard of him. So what was the clash over?
Frick was determined to break the union. He announced these big wage cuts and then locked the workers out.
Locked him out. And then...
He brought in the Pinkertons, the private security force.
Oh, yeah. Those guys have a reputation.
A pretty brutal one. They came in on barges up the river.
And the workers met them.
They did. Workers and their families right there on the riverbank.
Wait.
Led to a massive gunfight. The Pinkertons actually had to surrender in the end.
Surrender. So the workers won that battle.
That specific battle, yes. But not the war, so to speak. The state government stepped in.
Ah, so yeah, the militia.
Yeah, Pennsylvania State Militia. Crushed the strike. Total defeat for the Union, really.
And wasn't there an assassination attempt on Frick later?
There was. An anarchist, Alexander Berkman, shows you the level of feeling, the intensity around it all.
So what's the big takeaway from Homestead?
Well, it really showed the power imbalance, right? Huge corporations, government backing, tough odds for workers. Maybe it even showed the limits of organizing just by craft and pushed towards, bigger industrial unions later on.
Okay, fast forward just a couple of years. 1894 Pullman strike. This one started in a company town.
Yeah, Pullman, Illinois, just south of Chicago. George Pullman's town for his railroad car workers.
And the trigger was?
The economic depression in 1893. Pullman laid off a ton of workers, slashed wages for the rest, like up to 30% cuts.
Ouch.
But here's the kicker. He refused to lower the rent or prices in his company town.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah.
Cut wages but kept the rent the same.
Exactly. Workers were trapped, facing severe hardship.
That sounds incredibly unfair. And that led to a bigger response.
It did. This is where Eugene B. Debs and the American Railway Union, the ARU, step in.
Debs. Okay. What did they do?
The ARU called for a nationwide boycott. Refused to handle any train with a Pullman car attached.
Nationwide? That's huge.
It was massive and really significant because it was the first big sympathy action in the U.S. Workers who didn't even work for Pullman were striking in solidarity.
So what was the impact? Did it work?
It crippled rail travel, across 27 states. Huge disruption.
But I sense a but coming. Government intervention again.
You guessed it. Pullman and the railroads got the federal government involved. President Cleveland's attorney general got an injunction, said the strike was blocking interstate commerce.
And Cleveland sent troops.
Thousands of them. to break the strike by force.
So another defeat for the workers.
A major one. Union leaders got blacklisted. Debs himself went to prison for violating the injunction.
And didn't prison kind of change Debs?
Yeah, that's a fascinating side point. It radicalized him. He read Marx in prison, became a major figure in the Socialist Party later on.
Wow. Okay, moving into the 1900s. Bread and Roses strike, 1912. Lawrence, Massachusetts. Textile workers, right? And lots of immigrant women.
Exactly. This one's really important. The trigger was a new state law reducing the work week slightly, from 56 to 54 hours.
Sound good for workers.
You'd think, but the mill owners just sped up the machines and cut pay to match. So shorter hours, same frantic pace, less money.
Not exactly an improvement.
Not at all. So the workers, mostly women from Ireland, Italy, Lithuania, places like that, they just spontaneously walked out.
And the established unions like the AFL, were they supportive?
Initially, no. The AFL back then was mostly focused on, white, skilled male workers. They didn't really jump in.
So who helped?
The workers turned to the IWW, the industrial workers of the world, the Wobblies.
The more radical union.
Right. They believed in organizing everyone across industries. They sent organizers, provided food, medical aid, helped coordinate everything.
And didn't the strikers do something unusual with their children?
Yes. Really powerful tactic. They arranged to send their kids to live with supportive families in other cities, to keep them safe, fed, away from the hardship and potential violence.
That must have gotten attention.
Huge attention, especially when the authorities tried to stop some kids from leaving by train, led to violence, terrible publicity for the owners.
So it brought national focus.
It did. Congressional hearings even happened, exposing the awful conditions in the mills.
And the outcome.
A victory for the workers. They won wage increases. And the strike really highlighted the power and importance of women and immigrants in the labor movement.
Okay, next big one. Flint sit-down strike, 1936-37. United Auto Workers versus GM. This involved a new tactic, didn't it?
Oh, yeah, the sit-down strike. Really innovative and super effective.
How did it work?
Instead of walking out, the UAW members just sat down right at their workstations inside the factories, occupied the plants.
So GM couldn't bring in replacements.
Exactly. Made it physically impossible to restart production without forcibly dragging every single worker out, which was, risky and difficult. One source mentioned trying to replace them would mean a fight at every single workstation.
I read about something called the Battle of the Running Bulls.
Right. That was when company security and police tried to storm one of the plants. The workers inside fought back hoses, car parts, whatever they could find.
And the government. Did they send troops this time?
Well, the Michigan governor, Frank Murphy, initially refused GM's demands to send in the National Guard. He actually ended up mediating.
And the UAW won.
Big time. GM recognized the UAW. A massive victory for organized labor, especially in the auto industry. Huge turning point.
Okay, jumping ahead quite a bit. Memphis sanitation workers strike, 1968. This one feels different, connecting labor with civil rights.
Absolutely crucial connection. The spark was incredibly tragic. Two black sanitation workers, Ethel Cole and Robert Walker, were crushed by a faulty garbage truck.
Oh, terrible.
And the city refused any compensation for their families. It was seen as part of this wider pattern of discrimination, awful conditions, terrible pay, no sick leave.
Just basic dignity denied.
Exactly. The tragedy just brought it all to a breaking point.
And the mayor, Loeb, was resistant.
Very resistant, dug his heels in, which led to, garbage piling up all over Memphis, a very visible crisis.
And this is where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. got involved.
Yes. He saw the clear link between economic justice and civil rights. He came to Memphis to support the strikers.
And tragically.
Tragically, he was assassinated while he was there in Memphis supporting them.
Unbelievable. Did the strike continue after his death?
It did. Coretta Scott King led this incredibly powerful silent march, maybe 40,000 people, in support. Eventually, the city had to give in.
They won.
Yes. Wage increases, union recognition for AFSCME, Local 1733. It powerfully showed that labor rights and civil rights were and are intertwined. It's about human dignity.
Okay, moving to more recent times. Air traffic controllers, 1981. Patricio. This one didn't end so well for the union.
No, it really didn't. Patico went on strike after talks with the FAA broke down.
And President Reagan's response was?
Swift.
And
very forceful. He invoked a law against government strikes, gave them 48 hours to return to work.
And when they didn't?
He fired them. Over 11,000 controllers. Just fired. And banned them from future federal jobs.
Wow, that's decisive.
Extremely. The union, PATICO, basically collapsed. And many see this as a real turning point.
How so?
It sort of signaled a shift, a much more hostile attitude towards unions from both government and corporations in the years that followed. Union membership started a noticeable decline after that.
Right. Okay, one more specific strike example.
Right.
The garment workers' strike in 1982. New York City, Chinatown, mostly Asian American women.
That's right. This one really highlights the power of workers who might have been overlooked.
What were they fighting against?
Their employers wanted to cut benefits and refused to sign a contract with the union, the ILGW.
And these workers, maybe underestimated, they took action.
They did. Nearly 20,000 of them, mostly immigrant women, walked off the job. They held this huge, impressive march through Chinatown, showed real resolve.
And did they win?
Yes, against the odds, maybe. Their determination paid off. Employers recognized the union, agreed to their demands.
So another example of collective action working, even for marginalized groups.
Definitely. And it pushed for greater recognition of women's rights within the labor movement, too.
These strikes, they paint such a vivid picture of the struggle. It makes sense to zoom out now, look at the bigger context of labor rights.
Yeah, the Labor Day piece reminds us it's a global thing, right? Recognizing workers as the backbone or engine of society.
It mentioned the first Labor Day in the Philippines was 1903. It's international.
Exactly. And all those strikes we talked about, they're part of this long, ongoing global push for just humane working conditions.
The Wikipedia source mentions core standards from the ILO, the International Labor Organization.
Right. Key principles. Freedom of association, basically. The right to form and join unions.
Okay, what else?
The right to collective bargaining. A ban on forced labor and child labor. And crucially, non-discrimination, equal pay for equal work, that sort of thing.
It's interesting how, as a formal concept, labor rights are relatively new, historically speaking, tied to unions, the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, though the desire for better conditions isn't new.
Yeah.
Wikipedia mentions things like the Peasants' Revolt in England way back when, or tailors protesting wages in New York in 1768.
So people have always pushed back.
Pretty much. But the formal rights, the structures, the unions, that really ramped up with industrialization. And thinkers like Karl Marx, as we mentioned with Debs, were early advocates focusing on that labor-capital relationship.
And rights go beyond just unions, right? Like working hours?
Oh, absolutely. The fight for the 8-hour day was huge. Now you hear talk about 4-day work weeks, that's a continuation.
And workplace safety, that must be a big one.
Critical. Think about tragedies like the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. That spurred massive safety reforms. Today, it covers everything from physical safety to occupational health, even social sustainability in supply chains.
And wages, obviously. The push for a living wage.
Always central. Enough to live on, with dignity, not just survive.
The reading also mentioned globalization's impact. That seems complicated.
It is. There's a concern that companies might chase cheaper labor in countries with weaker protections. A race to the bottom, some call it.
That makes sense. Lower standards mean lower costs.
Right. Some argue developing countries might even see lax enforcement as a competitive edge to attract investment.
But there's another side to it.
Yeah, the counterargument is that global trade, consumer pressure, international groups, they can actually push for better standards. Companies wanting access to global markets might need to clean up their act. It's a constant tension.
So, bringing it to today, where are we now? The Labor Day article suggested that even with progress, lots of workers still face problems.
For sure. Inadequate pay, job insecurity, unsafe conditions. These are still very real for many, especially maybe for informal workers or people in the gig economy.
The pandemic really highlighted that, didn't it? Frontline workers.
Absolutely. Showed how essential they are, but also how vulnerable. Often low pay, not enough protection while taking huge risks. And the gig economy, that's a whole new frontier for figuring out basic rights and security.
It's also interesting how Labor Day itself has maybe shifted. Less about marches, more about barbecues and sales.
Yeah, it seems to have evolved for many into more of a leisure holiday, which, maybe reflects some progress. People have more leisure time won through past struggles.
But it's good to remember the history.
Definitely. Remember why the day exists in the first place, the struggles behind it.
Something else that stood out from the Center for Migration Studies piece was the role of immigrant labor in the U.S. It's huge.
Absolutely vital. The numbers are striking. In 2023, foreign-born workers were, what, over 18% of the whole U.S. labor force?
Yeah, over 18%. And their participation rate is actually higher than native-born workers.
That's right. They're crucial in so many sectors: services, construction, transport, agriculture, often doing jobs that complement native-born workers who might be more in management or sales.
And the article didn't shy away from undocumented workers either. Mentioned over 8 million are part of the economy.
Yeah, making huge contributions, especially in construction, restaurants, farming. And it's often overlooked, but they pay taxes too.
Billions in taxes.
Yeah.
Even if they can't get benefits like Social Security.
Exactly. Billions in federal, state, local taxes, plus Social Security, Medicare contributions. The argument is that formalizing their status would actually be a big economic boost.
And the flip side, the potential cost of mass deportations sounds massive, both financially and in terms of GDP loss.
Right. The piece frames it not just socially or politically, but as a critical economic issue. We need these workers to avoid labor shortages, especially looking ahead in fields like healthcare.
With the U.S. population aging.
Precisely. Immigrant labor is becoming even more essential for economic growth, filling gaps. The data is pretty clear on their role now and going forward.
Okay, so we've really covered a lot. Early actions, those pivotal, often violent strikes, the development of rights, the situation now, the role of immigrant workers.
It's quite a journey through history.
It really makes you think about how those fights for basic rights back then directly impact, the jobs and conditions we might take for granted today.
Absolutely. Which kind of leads to a final thought, maybe something for you, the listener, to chew on.
Okay, what's that?
Well, given how work keeps changing, the gig economy, automation fears, ongoing issues with wages and security, what comes next, what new ways of organizing or advocating might be needed to make sure work is fair and dignified for everyone in the future?
That's a big question.
It is. And how do we balance that need for collective action for better conditions with, say, the individual enjoyment of leisure time that Labor Day also represents? Finding that balance? That's the ongoing challenge, isn't it?
Definitely something to think about. A crucial question for the future of work.